Welcome to a series where we talk about the World Cup histories of each nation at the 2026 World Cup. Today, we'll be talking about the most obscure double runner-ups in the history of the world's most prestigious sporting event. When you think of soccer greatness, you usually don't go to the streets of Prague and Czechia, formerly the Czech Republic, and before that, half of Czechoslovakia. In fact, this team is making their first World Cup appearance in 2 decades and is looking for their first knockout appearance as an independent nation. There's some history here though, and some reason to be excited about the Czechs spicing up Group A here. We could start all the way back in 1930 for the history of the Czechoslovakia national team, but kind of feels weird to do that here. Maybe if y'all want that in the future, I can make that video, but the long story short here is that Czechoslovakia became sort of a second-tier power in the soccer world during their existence, making the World Cup more often than not and making a couple of great runs. In Italy 1934, the second tournament ever and Czechoslovakia's first appearance, the team would come back and beat Romania in the first round, then do the same thing and knock out Switzerland in the quarters. In a big matchup against Hitler's Germany, the Czechoslovaks would do the world a favor and win 3-1, moving on to the World Cup final to play against the hosts, Benito Mussolini's Italy. There are all kinds of allegations about this game. It's one of the most controversial games in the history of the sport, but despite taking the lead against the Italians, the Czechs and Slovaks would let in an equalizer and lose in extra time, finishing runners-up. Their next few runs were pretty unremarkable, with their 1938 World Cup appearance being ended at the hands of the Brazilians in the infamous Battle of Bordeaux. And after a couple of group stage exits, we arrive at Chile 1962. They actually got out of the group this time, finishing second behind Brazil and edging out Spain and Mexico. But then Czechoslovakia went on a run in the knockouts. They beat Hungary in the quarters, dropped 3 on Yugoslavia in the semis to reach the World Cup final for the second time, but they unfortunately ran into Brazil again, and despite their best player Pelé being injured, the rest of Brazil's dream squad would run up a 3-1 win on Czechoslovakia to go back-to-back and end our boys' dreams. Czechoslovakia remained a player in the international scene after this, but would never reach the same heights as 1962, at least not in the World Cup. They failed to reach England 1966 and lost all 3 games in their group at Mexico 1970. I'm not covering the Euros in this video specifically, that's not what this video is about, but with Czechia specifically, I feel like I need to dip my toes into this ocean. At Yugoslavia 1976, a 4-team tournament admittedly, Czechoslovakia would pull a huge upset of Johan Cruyff's Netherlands team to reach the final. Here, they met the team that had beaten the Dutch in the 1974 final, West Germany. Czechoslovakia took an early 2-0 lead, but gave 1 goal back immediately and held on to the 2-1 lead all the way until the 89th minute where they folded. The game went to extra time and then penalties, and after going 3 for 3 each, Czechoslovakia would take the lead when their 4th taker, Ladislav Jurkovic, hit and the German taker missed. This gave their 5th taker an opportunity to quite literally etch his name into the history books. He stepped up, and with the tournament on the line, continental glory, he softly chipped it down the middle. He did a Panenka, and luckily for him it worked. Antonin Panenka had just won the Euro for Czechoslovakia, putting them at the top of Europe. Now what's crazy is that they missed both West Germany 1974 and Argentina 1978. How the fuck? They made it to España 1982 and drew France, lost to England, but only got a draw with Kuwait. That put them in 3rd place and only the top 2 advance. Czechoslovakia was grouped again. After missing Mexico in 1986, they would grace Italy in 90 and hang 5 goals on the United States in the groups on their way to the knockouts for what would turn out to be the final time. They ended Costa Rica's Cinderella story with an emphatic 4-1 win before losing to West Germany in the quarters. During the events of the qualification campaign for USA 94, Czechoslovakia would dissolve. It wasn't extremely dramatic like the Soviet Union's collapse, and it wasn't extremely violent like the breakup of Yugoslavia. The country split peacefully and would stay under Czechoslovakia for qualification, failing one last time before becoming their own national teams. This is where our history really begins. For most of their independent years, Czechia was called the Czech Republic, but I'm calling them Czechia and I don't really care. Anyway, Czechia's history begins with the qualification campaign for France 1998, and here they would be drawn into a group with Slovakia because, of course, along with Spain, FR Yugoslavia, which was the very confusing name for Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo post-breakup, and then the Faroe Islands and Malta. The Czechs were favored to finish at least 2nd in this group, even with a good Spain team. Let's really quickly look back at the Euros, where the Czechs would play in their first ever international tournament, England 96. Grouped with Germany, Italy, and Russia, the Czechs would get out of this death trap by beating Italy and pipping them in the group, Moving on to the knockouts. In the quarters, they would play Portugal, and despite missing their playmaker, a young Pavel Nedved, the Czechs would win 1-0 thanks to a brilliant goal from Karel Poborský that has since been named the Poborský lob. This moved them onto a France team that would become legendary in 2 years, but this game would finish 0-0, and the Czechs would win a nervy penalty shootout to move on to the final, where their incredible run would come to an end at the hands of Germany, who scored a golden goal to avenge their loss in the Euro final 20 years ago. Coming into qualification riding this wave, the Czechs crashed hard. A 0-0 draw with Spain, losses home and away to Yugoslavia, and a loss in Valladolid to Spain meant that the Czechs were already hopelessly adrift, not even halfway through the campaign. The Czechs would end up finishing 7 points behind Yugoslavia just for second, finishing nowhere close to the World Cup in their first attempt despite having the talent to do it. The Czechs came into qualifying for Korea-Japan 2002 coming off a worse showing at Euro 2000, having been grouped behind champions France as well as the Netherlands, but they would be dealt a huge favor by the group draw for qualification, being put in Pot 1. They got Denmark, Bulgaria, Iceland, Northern Ireland, and Malta, a group they'd be favorites in. The results weren't amazing halfway through. A 0-0 draw at home against Denmark is the end of the world, but drawing 0-0 in Tacali against Malta, the only point that the Maltese would get all campaign, that honestly is, that is the end of the world. That's a horrible result. I can't even lie. Things continue to be rocky after this, with the Czechs losing in Copenhagen and also shockingly in Reykjavik to Iceland, and dropping to 3rd place after 8 games. This was starting to go tits up fast. A win against Malta in their penultimate game tied them with Bulgaria on points for 2nd, both looking 2 points up at Denmark, and their last games were against each other. In Prague, the Czechs would absolutely batter Bulgaria, putting 6 on them and securing 2nd place, but Denmark would beat Iceland in their last game to secure 1st. This meant Czechia was going to the UEFA playoffs, where they would go head-to-head with Belgium for a spot in the World Cup. The Czechs were the favorites in this tie, even though Belgium are the team with the World Cup history, but they would choose to try and weather the storm in the first leg in Brussels. Gert Verheyen would score a pretty early set-piece goal for the Belgians, and they would hold on to that 1-0 lead for the rest of the game, with the Czechs barely attempting to equalize. It's okay though, because we entered leg 2 in Prague, and the Czechs shit the bed there too. They did nothing on attack once again, and when they conceded a late penalty and Mark Wilmots converted, the Czechs were out. This was a massive shock. They knocked out the Czech Wonder team, one of the weaker Belgian sides, beat one of the best Czech teams ever. You want me to back that statement up? Let's look at the Euros again. Portugal 2004, drawn in a group with Germany, the Netherlands, and fucking Latvia, because sure. The Czechs began their campaign by having to come from behind to beat Latvia. It's not a great sign. But then they came from behind again to beat the Dutch in Game 2. And then they did it again to beat Germany and finish the group on 9 points. This is diabolical. I can't believe they did this. They then got their revenge on Denmark by putting 3 past them in the quarterfinals before their amazing run finally ended in the semis, where they became the penultimate victim of the underdog terrorist ball Greeks. Still, what a great run. You shudder to think what this team could have managed in the free-for-all that ended up becoming Korea-Japan 2002. We move on to Germany 2006 though, and once again hope springs eternal for this golden generation of independent Czechs. They would be drawn into a qualifying group with the Netherlands, Romania, Finland, North Macedonia, Armenia, and Andorra, and this really ended up just being a 3-team group. The Dutch dominated, winning both their games against the Czechs, but our boys would go 9 for 10 in their other games, splitting with Romania and dominating the riffraff. This was enough to finish in 2nd place, just above Romania and 5 points behind the Dutch. This meant no automatic tickets to the World Cup, that went to the Oranje, but this got them to the UEFA playoffs again. The Czechs would get a good draw in the playoffs and get Norway, a team that just wasn't that talented at the time. We'll get to Norway in like a month, but man, they have a brutal history outside of the 90s and literally right now. The first leg in Oslo was dominated by Czechia, who got a goal in the 31st minute through Vladimir Smitser, and they held that 1-0 lead to gain the advantage going home. In Prague, the Czechs finished the job, with Tomáš Rosický scoring a 2nd goal to give the Czechs a 2-0 lead in the playoff, punching their ticket to the World Cup for the first time. I'm so happy this Czech team made the World Cup because it allowed some of their greatest ever players to reach the World Cup at least once, and all of these guys would have been on the greatest to never play at the World Cup list, along with all the George Weahs and George Bests of the world. I'm talking Pavel Nedved, an aging Ballon d'Or winning midfielder who's probably the best player to ever wear a Czechia kit, along with other great players around Nedved's age like Karel Poborský and Jan Koller. There's also an emerging Tomáš Rosický who I wish could have just fucking stayed healthy, but damn, this guy was a baller when he actually played. And we also had a young Petr Cech in goal, who would be here with the Czechs through all the highs and the lows until he abruptly retired from soccer in 2019 and began playing goalie in ice hockey. This dude is one of the best goalies of his generation and is not a fault for any of what's about to happen here. So Czechia gets their group draw for Germany, and good God, they get a very good Italy team that goes on to win the World Cup that summer. They get probably the most hyped United States team of all time, and they get the ultimate snake in the grass in Ghana. This was a tough group to draw, but the Czechs were favored to at least get second spot for that knockout spot, if not pip the group in front of Italy. We've seen the Czechs beat teams better than the US and Ghana in the Euros since their independence. And you know what? Things started amazing. They played the US in Gelsenkirchen in their first match, and they laid the hammer on my countrymen. The Czechs already had the lead in the 5th minute when the right back Zdeněk Bergera beat the entire defense down the right flank and found Jan Koller in the box for a free header. They doubled that lead before halftime on a fucking heater from Rosicky, who put it top corner from like 30 yards out so casually. Poor Casey Keller never had a chance. Rosicky would get his brace in the second half when the American defense parted like the Red Sea, and he beat Keller one-on-one, and the Czechs had numerous opportunities outside of this, but still won comfortably 3-0. Between this and the 5-1 beating that unified Czechoslovakia put on us at Italia 90, I'm sure glad they're Mexico's problem this time around. That's all I gotta say. Next up was Ghana and Cologne, and a win here puts the Czechs into the knockouts no matter what happens against Italy. This is free. Ghana is a World Cup debutant, albeit one with Michael Essien, John Mensah, Stephen Appiah, Sully Montari, Asamoah Gyan. This game kicked off. Ghana won a corner 40 seconds in, and after Czechia cleared it away, Appiah put the ball into the box. Gyan was unmarked and beat Czech for a 1-0 Ghana lead like 70 seconds into the match. This game was full of opportunities from here, mostly for Ghana, although neither team took any until the 64th minute when Matthew Amoa got inside the box and was brought down by Czech defender Thomas Ujifalasi for not only a penalty, but also a red card. Silver lining is that Gyan missed the penalty. It's not the last time that's going to happen at the World Cup, but having to defend with only 10 men proved to be too much of an issue. After holding out the entire game and keeping the Czechs in the game, Petr Cech would finally be beaten by a rocket shot from Appiah in this 82nd minute, and that was it. The Czechs lost 2-0. This was low-key a humiliation in the same way they did the US, and this meant now that the Czechs had to beat Italy to feel good about going through to the next round. Game 3 in Hamburg against the Italians, the Czechs needed a miracle and they did not get one. To be fair, they were the more enterprising team in the first half thanks to the brilliance of Pavel Nedved, but they weren't able to convert into end product, and when they got hit on the counter, Italy took the lead through a header from Marco Materazzi. The Italians, and more specifically Gigi Buffon, kept the Czechs out of goal for the rest of the game, and after a bunch of opportunities on the counter as well as a second red card for a Czech player, Italy would find a second goal to knock out Czechia. All the drama in this group would come down to now to the other game between Ghana and the US. Just fucking shoot me now, I guess. But the Czechs were disappointingly grouped in the first World Cup as an independent nation. The Czechs would go into South Africa 2010 off the back of an unsuccessful Euro appearance in 2008, where they were grouped at the hands of Portugal and Turkey. Despite this, they would remain in Pot 1 and get a super easy group draw, ending with Poland, Northern Ireland, Slovakia, Slovenia, and the Dead Ducks San Marino. On paper, the Czechs should have won this group handily, even with all that talent that just left the national team. Instead, the Czechs drew 0-0 in Belfast, lost in chores out of Poland, barely beat Slovenia at home, drew 0-0 in Maribor in the return game, lost in Prague to the Slovaks, then only drew in the return game against Slovakia. Their only win in this stretch other than Slovenia win was against San Marino, and that left them in 5th place going into their final 3-game home game stretch. A 7-0 win against San Marino got them ahead of Poland, and a win against those Poles in the penultimate game allowed them to climb ahead of Northern Ireland for 3rd. Unfortunately, Slovenia also upset Slovakia on that match day, letting them keep 2nd place by 2 points ahead of the Czechs going into their final match day. With the Slovenes playing San Marino in their final game, it was already over. The Czechs bookended their super disappointing qualifying campaign with another 0-0 draw against Northern Ireland, and watched as their brother Slovakia celebrated their first World Cup appearance instead. Next up was Brazil 2014, and I hate to break it to you guys, but we've reached the end of our now traditional checkup on how the Czechs did in the Euros. It's not because they didn't make it to Poland-Ukraine 2012. They're there and will continue to be at every Euro in the future somehow, but in these last 5 Euros, the Czechs would ping-pong between being grouped and losing in the quarterfinals. Their days of surprise Euro runs are over for now, unfortunately. But yeah, Brazil 2014, their qualification group was kind of wild. You got Italy out of pot 1 in an era where they used to actually qualify for the World Cup, as well as Denmark, Bulgaria, Armenia, and Malta. This was doable. 8 of the 9 runner-ups in Europe got to play in a playoff, and this was an attainable goal for the Czechs. But it was pretty clear the Czechs were in a significant down period. All the great team that had left along with Pavel Nedved was not really replaced, and the guy that was supposed to lead the new generation of Czech players, Tomáš Rosický, just could not stay on the pitch. It was basically just Petr Cech doing his best in goal, and goddamn did that man do his best. But the rest of the skillers were just not here. The group started with 2 0-0 draws and a home win against Malta, their easiest game here. In their 4th game, they lost at home to Denmark, and at this point sat tied for the Danes in their group. They needed to start getting better results, and that just did not happen. A win in Yerevan was great. A home 0-0 with Italy wasn't a bad result either, but losing at home to Armenia was a killer. They were only a point behind Bulgaria for 2nd, but tied with Denmark and Armenia for 3rd, and a full 8 points behind Italy for the automatic spot. Their 8th game was a tough one, a trip to Turin to play Italy, and while our Czechs put up a fight, Italy was able to grab a 2-1 win to clinch their own tickets to the World Cup for their most recent time somehow, and now Czechia was far out of the race for 2nd as well. Wins in their final 2 games were nice, beating Bulgaria knocked them out of the running, but Czechia would finish 3rd in the group, once again being denied by the Danes. For Russia 2018, Czechia would draw the holders Germany, along with Northern Ireland, Norway, Azerbaijan, and San Marino, and they were realistically playing for the playoff spot from the jump. Through the first round of games, they got drilled by Germany as expected, drew 0-0 with Northern Ireland, and also disappointingly drew Azerbaijan. But they did beat Norway and San Marino to sit 3rd behind Germany and Northern Ireland. Then they drew in Oslo. And then they lost at home to Germany on a late winner for Mats Hummels. And then against the Northern Ireland team, they were already 7 points behind for 2nd. They would lose 2-0 in Belfast to be eliminated from contention with 2 games to go. Now it's Qatar 2022, and the Czechs would be drawn into a group with Belgium, Wales, Belarus, and Estonia. You definitely expect the Czechs to finish 3rd in this group, and yeah. They got 2 total points in their 4 games against the Red Devils and the Dragons, and they finished in 3rd, not good enough for even a spot in the playoffs. But wait! From the top rope with the steel chair, it's the Nations League! There were 12 spots in 3 European playoff brackets, and while 10 went to group runners-up, including Wales, the remaining 2 spots went to Nation League winners. Thus, as a result of being the 3rd best team in the 2nd division of the Nations League, Czechia got a spot in a bracket where they just had to beat Sweden and Poland to reach the World Cup. Czechia versus Sweden. This is the rare European soccer game that would be higher profile as a hockey game normally. This would be a cagey game, with Sweden getting the better opportunities, but nothing separating the teams on the scoreboard at halftime. The second half was dead as fuck, with the game going to extra time where Sweden will push for a winner. In the 110th minute, they would find it, with nice interplay between Alexander Isak and Robert Nkwasen being finished for the winner. Sweden was going through, and after a mighty effort, the Czechs would now be missing their 4th consecutive World Cup, the longest dry streak in the national team's history. This brings us to North America 2026, the whole reason we're talking about the Czechs in the first place, and this was one of the last teams to book their spot. I kind of scrambled to get this script together, low-key. They would be drawn into a group with Croatia, Montenegro, the Faroe Islands, and Gibraltar, and this went okay. Wins in their first 3 games were nice, but then they got smacked 5-1 by Croatia. They then took a second loss in Torshavn, the home of the Faroe Islands. That's insane. But they were still able to finish 2nd and book a spot in the UEFA playoffs for this 2nd straight World Cup campaign. Here, they would get bracketed against Ireland, but did get to play this game in Prague. In front of their home fans, the Czechs went down 2-0 immediately, surrendering a penalty that Troy Parrott converted, and then giving up a second goal and a shit show of an own goal that barely went over the line. Down but not out, the Czechs would win a penalty this time, and Patrick Schick would convert to make it 2-1 Ireland. The game would enter a holding pattern from here, with the Czechs pushing for an equalizer and the Irish just trying to hold on. They would do that all the way until the 86th minute, when Czechia scored the type of equalizer I'd be proud of as an Arsenal fan, a header off a corner from center-back Ladislav Krejci. That pushed the game to extra time, where the Czechs had the best opportunity, but neither team scored and the game went to pens. The first 2 takers for both teams hit, but Ireland would take the lead after the 3rd round when Moimir Chaidel's pen was saved by Caoimhin Kelleher, and it once again looked like it was over for the Czechs. But nope, Matej Kovar made a great save on Finn Azaz's pen, and Schick made it even again going into the final round. Alan Brown stepped up and took a bad penalty, with Kovar easily saving it and giving Jan Clement the chance to win it for the Czechs. Kelleher went the right way, but the penalty was too good. Czechia won the shootout and finished an impressive come-from-behind win to book their place in the playoff final against Denmark. Czechia fought a war to get to this final, and Denmark brushed aside North Macedonia relatively easily, but the great equalizer was the random draw that put this playoff in Prague, giving the Czechs home field advantage once again. They would take advantage immediately, using a corner to score 3 minutes into the game when Kufal put the ball into the box and found Pavel Schultz, who hit an awesome volley on the bounce. The Czechs would hold this lead into halftime and well past until a Danish free kick in the 72nd minute was taken by Mikkel Damsgaard and placed perfectly for Joachim Andersen to hit it right past Kovar to equalize. This sent the game to extra time, where Czechia once again took the lead on a set-piece goal, this one also set up by Sufal, who put the ball into the box. Thomas Susek took it down, and Krejci scored his second goal of the playoffs on, for being honest, a complete shit show of a goal. Denmark would find their salvation, luckily for them, also on a corner and a header goal for Kasper Høeg. After coming from behind 2 goals against Ireland to force a shootout, the Czechs have now blown 2 different leads to fall into a shootout. The shootout started with Rasmus Højlund hitting the crossbar in the first penalty, and that shot Danish nerves to hell and back. Christian Eriksen would calm their nerves by hitting their second penalty, but both of Czechia's takers also hit, and they had the lead going into round 3 already when Kovar struck again, saving Anders Dreyer's attempt to put the Czechs on the brink. Krejci's shot was saved by Mads Hermansen to keep them in it, but the damage was done. Denmark's fourth taker, Mathias Jensen, fucking blazed his penalty over the bar, and after Mikael Sadalek hit his pen, it was done. The 20-year drought was over. Czechia was going back to the World Cup. I want to be clear, I don't think this Czechia team is anywhere near as good as the team that made it to the 2006 World Cup, but I think this team could do what that one couldn't and actually make it out of their groups. They got a great draw, joining a group that has the co-hosts Mexico, one of their old rivals from the Czechoslovakia days, as well as both South Africa and South Korea. Good teams, but not unbeatable opposition for a team that seems happy to grind it out with anyone. This Czech team doesn't really play beautiful football, but they could be game to spring a surprise or two. That's day 3 of this oral retelling of World Cup history through the lens of each team that made it to the 2026 World Cup, and we're almost done with our first group of 12 at this upcoming tournament. Tomorrow we'll talk about the final team, South Korea, and their crazy incidents in games over the years. There's one run in particular that I'm sure a few fan bases have something to say about. We're going to talk about all of it. Thank you all once again for watching. Sorry if this episode was one of the drier ones, but we've got some real meat on the bone next time. I hope you all enjoy.